Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining us today as a way of getting started. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. It's great to be on. So I'm Ryan Gottfredson, and I am a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton, and I'm a mental success coach. And so beyond what I do with the university, which includes my research and my teaching, I work with organizations and organizational leaders to improve their effectiveness, primarily through a focus on mindsets.
Cool. How'd you get into this?
Well, I did my PhD program at Indiana University, and my dissertation was on leadership, and particularly it focused on leadership behavior. So what behaviors do leaders need to engage in to be more effective? But I don't know about you, and I guess you probably think the same way that I do, and that is that effective leadership isn't about doing the right things. It's about being a certain type of person and as somebody that other people want to follow. And so what I've learned is that most leadership development programs, and I would even say sales development programs, focus primarily on here are the things you need to do.
Yep.
But it misses part of the mark. I'm not saying that's unimportant, but it misses part of the mark, and that is, who do we need to be? And so as a way to try to capture this element of being, I began focusing on motives and intentions of leaders and of sales reps. And then that led me to where I'm really focusing on now, which is mindsets. So our mindsets are the mental lenses that we wear that
Yep.
shape how we see the world. And because they shape how we see the world, they're foundational to our thinking, learning, and behavior, and then consequently our success. And so when I focus on mindsets, I'm trying to get at the root of what's driving individuals' success. And so I'm excited about the idea of exploring this with you with regards to the sales world.
Cool. Now, are these independent, or how do you prioritize them as far as, like, where do you start?
Yeah, great question. And maybe let me put a question back on you.
Yeah.
So as I've listened to your podcast, I would say it is not uncommon for the word mindsets to pop up.
It comes up a lot, especially in sales, because you're dealing with people.
Yeah. So
And
so as you talk about mindsets quite a bit, let me put the question on you. What can you identify a specific mindset that sales leaders or sales reps need to have to be successful?
they certainly need to be resilient,
Uh-huh.
because in sales, it's 95% plus rejection.
Yeah.
And especially, well, both sales leaders and sales people are in between the company that wants them to sell something, but wants them to sell it within this container, and customers who have varying levels of interest, timing, priorities, and probably want it to be a little different than the container it's in now.
Yeah. So you're right on, but one of the things that I sense from, and you're not alone, but one of the things that I sense as I go around and I talk to leaders and business professionals is that we all understand intuitively what mindsets are, and we understand that there's a lot of value in mindsets, but there's not many people that could specifically identify mindsets that drive success. And so what I've done on my end is when I began learning about the power of mindsets, I asked myself the question, well, what mindsets do I need to have to be successful? And I first started, I probably shouldn't have started here, but I first started, as probably most normal people do, is I go to Google and I search, mindsets. I'm doing all this searching. And what I'm finding is I could probably come up with a list of 100 different
Right.
things, such as resilience, which is I'm going to say is part of a mindset that I'll focus on. But the problem is nobody's very specific about mindsets in terms of what you could find online. So what I did is I dove into the academic literature and come to find out that there's 30 to 40 years of research on specific mindsets that have been found over this 30, 40 years to drive our thinking, learning, behavior, that they're truly foundational to how we operate and how we process the world around us. And so what I've done is I've identified different sets of mindsets that come from psychology, management, education, marketing, and I brought them together into a single framework that allows us to put very specific labels on mindsets. And once we can put specific labels on mindsets, now they become something that we could focus on and something that we can develop around. So as leaders, we can identify what our mindsets are, what mindsets we need to have. And then also as leaders, what mindsets do my reps have? And how can I identify where they are at and how they can improve their mindsets? And if we can improve the lenses in which they see how the world around them, then we can improve their effectiveness.
Okay, well, let's take some of the ones I think we both agree with, like challenges and failure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and this is the interesting thing is you probably have seen this even more than I have, which is sales reps, they're knocking on doors or whatever, making calls, sending emails, whatever it might be. And they're met with a huge failure rate, like you said.
Yeah.
And there's some sales reps that they tend to internalize this failure as though they are a failure.
Right.
And these types of reps it's hard to retain them, right? And that's one of the big problems in most sales industries. It's hard to retain new reps. And really what I found in through my consulting work is it takes 2 years to get a rep up and running to full capacity.
A long time, yeah.
So if you lose somebody within those 2 years, then this is a huge waste of time and effort. But then there's other sales reps that they don't see challenge and failure as things to avoid. They see them as opportunities to learn and grow. And it's those reps that really thrive. And so the difference between these two mindsets is a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. So a fixed mindset is when we believe that we don't have that we are unable to improve our talents, intelligence, and abilities. And when we don't feel like we can improve, we want to avoid failure, because when we hit failure and don't believe we can improve, then we're left to internalize that. Whereas if we have a growth mindset, we see challenges and failures not as being indicative of who we are, but just as a blip on the screen that teaches us something. Okay. And so if we can identify where people stand on this continuum between fixed and growth, then we can help them get to be more growth.
And certainly some people feel like that's just the way I am and the world should adapt to me. Right?
Yep.
And that's why I think a lot of athletes do well in sales. A lot of people out of the performing arts do well in sales because it's an iteration. They know they're not going to win every game. Not everyone's going to laugh at their joke. Not everyone's going to love their music or their play, and they're going to make mistakes, and they get feedback. Mm-hmm. I get the knowing it, but that's the easy part, isn't it?
Well, it's half of the battle, right?
Yeah.
So because until, maybe for many of your listeners, until now, they may have never heard the terms fixed and growth, right? But once we can come up with these terms and understand them, now we can evaluate them. Because this is the beauty of focusing on mindsets, is it allows individuals to awaken to themselves at a level that they've probably never awakened to before, because they haven't had the tools and understanding necessary to do so. And so half of the battle in terms of developing and improving somebody's mindsets is you've got to awaken them to their current mindsets and their potential for mindsets. Okay. Because as you said, I think most people just think my mindsets are ingrained, or this is who I am. Yeah. The reality is, and what 30 years of research on fixed and growth mindsets have found, is relatively small interventions, such as a 15-minute training or a 3-minute video, has a tendency to move the needle on our mindsets for up to a month later. But if we can reiterate kind of these interventions over and over again, what we are actually doing is we're rewiring our brains. So over and over again, research says that small, incremental, but continuous interventions change our mindsets. And so that's the beauty of this, is this becomes now something that we can develop and work with.
And what is the most effective way to do that?
Yeah. So, and there's different ways. So one way, so I'm going to present a variety of things. One is, and I'll introduce it now, and we can probably talk about it more as we go along, is I've developed a personal mindset assessment that people could take for free. So they could go to my website, which is just www.ryangottfredson.com. They could take this assessment. And then now this provides some objective data around their mindsets and how their mindsets stack up to thousands of other people who have taken the mindset assessment. It comes with a report that discusses what these mindsets are, why they are important. So that's one avenue. Another avenue to go is to learn more about these mindsets. So a great book on fixed and growth mindsets is called Mindsets by Carol Dweck.
Yeah.
She's the pioneer in this space. It's a fantastic book. And then in addition to that, it's really valuable to learn about the plasticity of our brain. And that is, our brain is consistently changing. Those are the fixed mindset. Again, they don't believe that they can change. But the more that we can learn about how we can change, and in particular, how nimble our brain really is, it opens up the idea like, oh, wow, this is maybe breaking down some mental barriers that I've had to thinking about my own growth and development. So there's a lot of really great TED Talks that if someone were just to type in brain plasticity, I think you would be really overwhelmed with some really cool information.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt there. But we tend to go back to our lizard brain when we get that rejection, when we have a bad day, when the roller coaster goes on that very far downhill. How do people consistently do this? I mean, I'm sure it's a habit. I'm sure it'd be great to have a coach. But if we either haven't done that yet or can't afford a coach or don't know who to do it with, what have you seen work well?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen a lot with sales organizations is they have maybe a sales team that has a weekly team meeting.
Yeah.
This team meeting provides an opportunity to talk about this for, a couple minutes, 5 minutes, just, how have you dealt with failure? Let's learn from some positive examples. There's so many that are out there. But then on a personal level, it's all about how we talk to ourselves. So we've got to change the dialogue that's going in our mind. So if somebody says no, then we don't say that necessarily internalize that as this is the final no. Well, this is a no, or this is a not yet.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can change the dialogue in our brain, like, okay, this didn't go so well. Now, what can I learn from the situation? And one of the things that I found, I would say I have some experience in sales, but not a ton of experience. But when I was in more direct sales, one of the things that I learned was that if I could reflect upon a sales call after the fact, write down some notes about how it went, where I could have improved, that doing that practice, while time consuming, accelerates my growth.
Yeah, that is something I took it more from both a process and a strategy standpoint. I made it a habit after every face-to-face call to sit down in the car before I got on the road and write down, what did I learn? What could I have done better? I call it a postmortem.
Yeah.
And it was the most powerful tool. My mindset wasn't so much the problem as it was, did I pick the right person to work with? Did I prepare? And I tell people on the podcast all the time, I never came out of a sales call feeling like I over-prepared.
Yeah.
That it is a performance. Now, did you happen to go on a mission after college? I saw you went to BYU.
Yeah, I did. That was maybe one element of sales, is going door to door in Boston, Massachusetts for 2 years.
I grew up there. Trust me, if you survive
we're
that.
all set is what we got at every door. We're all set.
So they opened the door without a gun or something, right?
Yeah, normally they would open without a gun, but
Yeah.
some people weren't afraid about telling us that they did have a gun.
Yeah. Because that is what, 98% rejection, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. 99.8% rejection.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've read of, I just got done reading a book, How to Un-F Yourself. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've seen it. I haven't read it though.
He comes up with more of a layman's approach to go through like these 4 questions to ask yourself. And it's really, are you willing, right, to open your mind up that it is elastic, that you do not have a fixed mindset? Are you
Yep.
willing to make a change?
Hmm.
And then build up confidence around it.
So
Um,
you bring up a great point, and this is going to segue into another set of mindsets that I focus on. So the first set that we just talked about is fixed and growth, and this is our ability to improve and develop our intelligence and abilities. But then the second set is the difference between closed and open mindsets. So this is now our mind. How open is our mind to new ideas?
yes.
And so when one of the things that I hear you talk a lot about is the coachability of a person, but also, I mean, I've worked with some pretty high-end sales reps in the medical sales industry, and this may be a stereotype, and correct me if you feel like I'm wrong, but most great sales reps, they have a tendency to think that their thinking is the best way to think.
It is. It's very consistent, because what happens is once they become good at something, it almost is a superstition to change it.
Yeah.
And what it is, my belief, it's they are unconsciously competent at it.
Yep.
They can't explain why they're good at it, and they don't want to muck with it.
Yep.
And also, I'm sure you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that graph. Salespeople fall into that. Once they have some success, they attribute 100% of it to themselves.
Yep. Yep. And so they get into this zone where my thinking is the best way to think, which means I am totally closed to any other ideas
Yes.
about how to do something. But what that does is it creates a barrier between where they are now
Yeah.
and places that they can go.
Yeah.
And so when you have this closed mindset, you want to be seen as being right. You want to verify that your thinking is correct instead of asking questions,
Yes.
which is the key to winning sales. You're the one that's seeking to provide the answers.
Yeah.
And when people disagree with you or question you, you take that as a threat and get defensive. But
Right.
when we have this open mindset, we're no longer focused on being seen as being right. We want to come to truth. We want to think optimally. And so we're open to the ideas and suggestions of others. We seek those out, and we see disagreement and questions as opportunities to learn and grow.
That's exactly what I've seen. Because in the Dunning-Kruger effect, that the end of it, the tail of it, is they go through this epiphany where they now are open and want to debate, engage the way doctors do, professors do,
Mm-hmm.
great chefs do, great lawyers do. They assume that they're wrong. They know that there's no perfect,
Yep. Yeah.
and they debate the issues to become better, not to prove that the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. And when you're early in your career and you are having success, while you exude confidence, a lot of times internally you're like, they
Fake it.
feel
Yeah.
maybe, and they may not even recognize it, but they're not super confident. So they're always trying to prove themselves. But then as you get beyond that, then what ends up happening is we don't have that fear of failing anymore, which
Right.
opens the door to being vulnerable, which includes this open-mindedness, really this humility. And there's a lot of power in having this vulnerability and humility, both in terms of leadership, but also in terms of direct sales, because now you can truly connect with the people that you're working with.
Yeah, especially when it's soft things, like, because when you go through our school system, you get a grade, right? You're there to memorize, process, and output stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then sales and real life is a lot of dealing with people.
Yeah.
And that is something that we really aren't taught.
Yeah.
We're kind of taught to conform but a lot of selling is not conforming.
Yeah.
It's
And
making
that,
people change.
yeah. And that gets to a third set of mindsets that I focus on is our approach and how we view people. So there's a difference between an inward mindset and an outward mindset. So when we have an inward mindset, we see ourselves as being more important than others. And in doing so, we have a tendency to see them as objects as opposed to people. But when we have an outward mindset, we see them as who they are, which is as people. We see that their feelings matter just as much, if not more, than our own feelings. And we're able to be much more empathetic and sympathetic. And so when I think about my stereotype of sales reps and the typical sales reps that I hate dealing with, let's just say the typical, I go on to a used cars lot and talk to some sales rep. Well, I usually feel that they see me as a dollar sign and not as a person. That they're more concerned about their sale than giving me value. And that's a huge lesson and mindset for sales reps to learn, is because if they can't see their customers, or if they're your sales leader, their sales reps as people, and try to understand their feelings, where they're coming from, what they value, then we're going to be limited in our capacity to sell to them and develop long-term relationships with them.
Yeah, because I'd love your feedback on this, because that is the number one law in my sales process, is that people will do what's in their own best interest, including the sales rep.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what blocks us from connecting with people.
Yep.
It blocks the empathy. And until you relinquish that, you can't connect with the other person. And I believe it's rooted in our survival mechanism, because, and also the tribalness of selling,
Mm-hmm.
that until you get to know somebody and have rapport, they're outside the tribe.
Yeah.
They're a threat to you.
Yeah, let me
Go
give you
ahead.
an example of where I see this. Is we have a tendency to focus on the things that we measure.
Yes.
So what do we measure? We measure sales.
Action
But
orders. Yeah.
but what drives sales? And that's the connection, right? So this is what the way that I've heard this term is, we've got to work the angles. So rather than focus on the things that we measure, we need to focus on the drivers of the things that we measure.
Yes.
And that now opens the door for us to focus on some of these, we call them softer things, like relationships.
Yes.
And so we've got to just, the key here, and this is again the power of focusing on mindsets, is it's an awakening thing. Like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was solely focused on the outcomes. And it, don't get me wrong, it takes a lot of courage for a sales rep to say, I'm going to stop focusing on the sales and I'm going to start focusing on the relationships, because there's a lot more uncertainty about it. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the most successful route for our long-term success.
It is on so many levels, because what they say will not be the truth until there's really that 3 stages: know, like, and trust. Because you see it in every transaction. When
Mm-hmm.
you know somebody, then you open up and you can start talking about certain things. Then when you become likable, then it opens up again. And then once you understand that they care about your interests above yours, then that when the real communication. And I think the word relationship is, like value, has been overused to the point where it doesn't have a meaning anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think we both know what we're talking about, but it comes back to both sides are blocked, focused on their own interests.
Well, yeah, we got to recognize that since we were born, we've been evaluating the degree to which other people see us
Serve
as a
us.
person versus an object.
Yeah.
So our customers and or our
So it's, but how do you get people to have that epiphany?
And it definitely is an awakening, because I'm going to be quite honest with you. Of the four mindsets that I focus on, this is the one that I've struggled with the most.
Yes.
Partly because I'm an achiever, I'm a doer. I want to cross things off my list, and sometimes my list gets in front of people, and that's not a good thing. And so it took me a while to awaken to this. Let me recommend a few books
Yeah.
that caused this awakening for myself. And they're all written by a small niche consulting group called the Arbinger Institute. So one is called Leadership and Self-Deception. Another one is Anatomy of Peace. And then the third is called The Outward Mindsets.
Yeah.
And the way that they portray these ideas between an inward and outward mindset, they call it in the box versus out of the box. It helps people really awaken to themselves in a way that you don't get defensive about it, right? So I think most of the times if somebody says, you have an inward mindset, it's like, no, I don't, right? But in reality, we might.
I think everybody does, but let's face it, we come out of the womb, all we care about is heat, food, and water. That's all we care about. And you see it all throughout life. Anybody who has ever driven, or I'm sure you've been on an airplane before, right? Yeah. You come off the airplane, there's no real rules about what side of the aisle you should walk on. So it becomes this random, everyone's in my way. Some people are walking at different paces. Some people will just randomly stop and look at their phone right in the middle of the hallway. And you're like,
yep.
And I run on this trail, and we have to share it with walkers, moms with strollers, bike riders, skateboarders, and everyone says, look out, here I come. It's this myopic view of the world and you see people 80 years old who have that same feeling. So they have never gotten out of this mindset.
Yeah.
And I think some of the catalysts are when you become a parent, because obviously now you have to care about somebody else more than yourself, or, you'd have to take care of a pet. Mm-hmm. Things like that. All of a sudden, your concern can't be solely about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you bring up a good point, in the sense that we've talked about thus far 3 negative mindsets: a fixed mindset, a closed mindset, and an inward mindset. All 3 of these mindsets are ultimately driven by fear. And not everybody is aware of the fears that drive them. So when we have an inward mindset, we're usually concerned or fearful about being passed up, or not getting the opportunities that we want. And so we have a tendency to try to hoard whatever we can get. Yes. And so if we can just, again, start to awaken to this, and just by putting labels on this, learning about it, now starts to open us up for us to then do something about it. Then we become empowered to do something about it. And so again, that's where I feel like the mindset assessment is really helpful, because if you can identify where your mindset is relative to thousands of others, there's no denying it anymore. Yeah. It is what it is. But the good thing is we can do something about it.
Yeah. And I think that is the point, is that I think first be aware of it, and then know that you can do something about it, that it isn't your height. You can't change your height, right?
Yeah.
You can change your weight, but you can't. Right?
Yep.
So, and I guess then you have to build habits to become first aware of it, and then correct it or ask for feedback.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you're changing the mental dialogue. And so you can, in any given moment, you can stop and you can ask yourself, am I being inward or am I being outward? Yeah. That's been what's been the most helpful for me. Is I could be seated in an airplane, and maybe there's like an open seat next to me. Do I try to hoard all my stuff there to be like, don't sit by me? Yeah. Or I could say, what is going on this airplane? And is there a way that I could help facilitate the boarding process to make it more effective in some way? Maybe there's some lady who needs help with getting her carry-on up in the rafter area or whatever. And is that something that I see that she has a need, and I see her as a person and she's probably concerned about lifting this, do I then go and help her? So in any given moment, no matter what we're in, we can ask ourselves, am I being inward or am I being outward? And just that stopping and pausing changes us.
Yeah.
And that's the incredible thing about it. And then the more this becomes, as you mentioned, a habit, something we do on a regular basis, over time, the outward mindset now becomes our norm as opposed to the inward mindset. That isn't to say we aren't going to slip, because we are. You know, this is probably out of the sets of mindsets, the one that we go in and out of the most.
Your belief is that the self-talk is the most powerful way to change this?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, cool. Hey, this has been a great conversation. I'm really passionate about this topic. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, go to my website, ryangottfredson.com. There you can get access to my mindset assessment. I've got a blog, things up there, but you can definitely contact me. I just want to mention one of the things that I do is I use this mindset assessment for individuals, so it surely can help individuals. But I also go in and help organizations and teams assess the collective mindset of the group. So I've had the pleasure of working with a Fortune 10 organization with their top 130 leaders. We were able to look at where are the mindsets across their top leaders. And one of the things that we found was that 42% of their top leaders had a fixed mindset, which suggested that they are inclined to avoid challenges and failure. And the big problem with this was that this company was coming up on a massive merger 4 months after the assessment. And so what this did is it allowed the organization to identify, okay, we've got some leaders that have a fixed mindset. This is our problem area. Now, what can we do to shift these mindsets prior to this merger occurring? Because that's a huge challenge. And we want our leaders running to that challenge as opposed to running away from that challenge. And in fact, I have a friend who is a financial advisor, and he said one of the problems that they have is in retaining new advisors, that they get into it for a year and they say, it's not for me. And usually the problem isn't an ability thing. Usually it's a mindset thing. And so I'm going to start working with him in terms of identifying what their mindsets are as soon as they get into the organization. And then that allows them to coach them at a different and deeper level than they have previously.